When Formula One teams got caught cheating. Formula One is a sport that depends heavily on regulations. These regulations help the teams and the drivers model a car that would be compatible with the rest of the grid, so that talent will be one of the most crucial attributes that drivers could possess in order to win races. Of course, this isn't always the case, because we know that there are teams that are much faster than others, but all of them have to comply with universally accepted rules which are given by the regulation body of the sport, the FIA. So what happens when teams are caught cheating? That depends on the infringement itself, and we are going to talk about some of the biggest cheating scandals in F1 in this video. Although Michael Schumacher is perceived as one of the best in the game, rightfully so, he hasn't been racing on a clean sheet throughout his career. One proof of this is the 2006 Monaco GP, when he was caught red-handed while needing the win desperately, as his main rival Alonso was ahead of him in the championship. During the qualifying session in Monaco, Schumacher was one of the fastest drivers on the grid. However, Alonso was looking to overcome the German in one of his flying laps, which is why Schumacher felt the need to stop this flying lap somehow. So what he did is he slid straight for the walls at the final hairpin of the circuit, Rascasse, after locking up his wheels. While his Ferrari stopped just in time and avoided the barriers of Monte Carlo, yellow flags waved and everyone behind him had to slow down, including Fernando Alonso. Many were convinced that Schumacher did this on purpose, and according to 1997 world champion Jacques Villeneuve, there is no way Schumacher would do this by mistake. There's no way you could make a mistake like that. I hope it was deliberate, because if you make a mistake like that, you shouldn't drive a race car, said Jacques. The stewards had to investigate this case, and Schumacher's explanation that it was an honest mistake and nothing more was behind this case wasn't enough to convince them. That is why he was stripped of his pole position and was sent to the back of the grid, with Alonso being promoted to P1 and the Spaniard taking the win afterward. Nelson Piquet Jr. is another driver who made a very controversial move in the first Singapore GP in 2008, and this is a much more bizarre situation because his teammate Fernando Alonso wasn't aware at that time that there was this plan between his team and Nelson Piquet Jr. At lap 14, Nelson mysteriously lost control of his car and hit the walls as he was out of the race after this incident. You would think that it's nothing special, right? Stuff like this happens all the time in Formula One. These situations are mostly utilized by teams to use a free pit stop under the safety car, but what was more interesting is that Alonso pitted on lap 12, just 2 laps before Nelson's accident. And while all the other teams were rushing in the pits, double stacking their drivers and causing accidents like Felipe Massa going off with the fuel hose, Alonso was on the track because he had a fresh set of tires. By the time the racing procedure continued, Alonso was P4 behind cars that haven't pitted yet, which means he was practically holding the first position on the grid, since those cars had to visit the pit lane sooner rather than later. Too big of a coincidence, don't you think? Well, 1 year after the race, Nelson Piquet Jr. admitted to the FIA that the whole thing was planned from the beginning to give Alonso an advantage in the championship. Alonso won the race, and it was too late to strip it away from him, but penalties to the team were applied. The team had multiple sponsorships cancelled, and bans applied for the team managing director Flavio Briatore, as he and the executive director Pat Simmons were forced to leave Renault. Scandals were present much earlier too, with a huge one involving Benetton in 1994. The team was alleged to have been using illegal traction control software to their advantage in races, but the FIA had a huge problem in proving it during the race. A refueling fire on Jos Verstappen's Benetton car at the German GP led to renewed allegations and an investigation by Intertechnique at Benetton's team factory. After the investigation, the FIA found that Benetton had been using a fuel valve without a fuel filter, which allowed fuel into the car 12.5% faster than a legal fuel valve. Schumacher was racing for the team at this time, and he won the championship this year. The 1994 regulations also saw the ABS or anti-lock braking systems and active suspension being banned, along with the electronic aids, which included the power brakes and traction control systems. Schumacher was initially banned to race in his home GP in Germany, along with the Hungarian GP, but after the appeal, the bans were moved for the Italian and the Portugal GP. Along with this, Benetton was punished with a $600,000 fine, and another team that was also found guilty in this season was McLaren, with them breaching the technical regulations over a fully automatic gearbox upshift device in the transmission system that was confirmed to be run in Mika Häkkinen's car during the San Marino GP. One of the freshest controversies is the Racing Point one from 2020. The team was called the Pink Mercedes, not because the team was using a Mercedes engine like McLaren or Williams, but because they were looking exactly the same as the 2019 car of Mercedes. The team had a new owner from 2018 and above in Lawrence Stroll, and it seems like his way of leading an F1 team is very different from the laws of F1. What he did is basically bought every part of the car that could have been bought from Mercedes and tried to copy the parts that were illegal to buy. Multiple teams have started protesting against the Racing Point policy, with them being equally fast as Red Bull and Mercedes, competing for podiums and wins. After a thorough investigation, the FIA found an issue with Racing Point buying the brake ducts from Mercedes, as from 2020 they belonged in the listed parts of the regulations. This means that they have to be developed individually by every team, not bought out from other teams. But the fine was ridiculous, as the team lost just 15 points and a $400,000 fine. In the end, they still finished P4 behind McLaren and ahead of Renault and Ferrari. The 2018 season was also an interesting one, and this is when teams that weren't using the Ferrari engine noticed how fast the Ferrari is on the main straights. The duo of Vettel and Raikkonen were literally flying in the first half of the season, and it was evident that the German would be a suitor for the 5th championship in his career, battling Lewis Hamilton for it. In 2019, the FIA started to monitor the fuel flow into the engines. This is where they found a breach in Ferrari's engines, as they were accused of blatant cheating by Max Verstappen from Red Bull. Apparently, Ferrari were able to outsmart the fuel pump sensors that measured how much fuel is pumped into the engine every 0.45 milliseconds. Ferrari, however, managed to program the pump to deliver more pump in the time that the sensors weren't looking at it. So once in every 0.45 milliseconds, the engine would take a bigger chunk of fuel. Red Bull were able to reverse engineer this process, and two other possible ways that Ferrari were gaining their advantage. Not just that, the team then presented the information to the FIA, and that's when the Maranello team was found guilty of yet another thing, and that is using the intercoolers to inject controlled amounts of oil into the combustion chamber to achieve additional bursts of power. As a punishment, the FIA made Ferrari and the teams they supply their engines to run with much less fuel for the 2020 season, as nothing much is known regarding the deal that Ferrari made with the FIA for the punishment. However, it was evident that the team was punished, which is why Ferrari dropped all the way to P6 in the Constructors' Championship, their lowest one in 40 years. We hope that you loved our choice of the best controversial things that happened in F1. More precisely, what happens when F1 teams get caught cheating. Loopholes are always present, as we can see in 2022 with the plankware and the porpoising issues, but cheating straightforward has never been a fair way to win an F1 race.